God, I've missed these. It's Twitter Tuesday here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Today is Twitter Tuesday. We missed last week. I was out last week on a little rest. Got a little R&R, so I got a lot of questions to catch up on, mostly post-draft stuff. So let's get into it. If you have a question you want to submit for these, we do them every Tuesday. You can always send them to me at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter, at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, or there's a Google form in the show notes if you'd rather do that. Let's dive into it. And I guess the first thing we should talk about is James Bradberry, who was released by the New York Giants. They ate a whole bunch of dead cap on him, so now he becomes a free agent. And Austrian Vikings fan asked, do you think the Vikes should go after James Bradberry? I say sure. At this particular juncture, free agent costs tend to kind of plummet because it's after the draft and players don't have a lot of leverage. It's kind of sign with me or you're not playing. So you can really get them at much cheaper. This is where you can get guys for insanely low prices, but it's usually only a one-year deal, and this is where you can kind of get the rentals who are available. But there are still lots of interesting names out there for sure, including Bradberry. But a lot of people have talked about like J.C. Treader. If you're looking for a center, don't think the Vikings will do that. Guys like Jadeveon Clowney, Sheldon Richardson, Melvin Ingram's out there. There's a lot of interesting names. As for Bradberry, I don't know if he's the best fit. If I understand him right, he's more of a bail corner, and that's not really the game the Vikings play. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I could be totally wrong about that with Bradberry, though. So if I'm wrong about that, correct me. However, that corner room, while it definitely feels a lot more rounded out after the draft, is still relying on rookies a lot. And to have another veteran presence in there, especially if it comes for cheap, is going to be pretty hard to argue against. So sure, but probably not is where I'll go with James Bradberry. Ragnar's Dooming Ghost asked, what would Spielman and Zimmer have done at 12? We're never going to get rid of these guys, are we? So Spielman and Zimmer, I could see Zimmer pounding the table and saying, just take Kyle Hamilton, which is probably what I would have done. If Spielman were, barring that, if they had the same scouting reports that said, Hamilton isn't that much better than Lewis Seen and Dax Hill, which is, I think, kind of what they had to have thought for their actions to make sense. And they wouldn't have been alone in that, by the way. But if you grant them that they're not going to take Hamilton, Rick probably takes a trade up with the Eagles. The Eagles traded up from 15 to 13 with, it was Houston. The Vikings probably take that deal, and you can go up above Houston now. And then they probably just keep trying to trade down a little bit. They might have ended up in the same place, assuming they had all the same scouting reports, which it is the same scouting staff. So I kind of can't assume that. But I think Rick probably doesn't trade down as far, but he might have traded down more times, if that makes sense. Just like a lot of smaller trades instead of one big one where you go down 20 spots in the first round. I don't know how different things really would be with Kwesi and Spielman, though. I mean, we've seen a lot of similarities between those two so far. Value in trading down, similar behaviors. We've got the same contract guy in Brzezinski. So, like, a lot of this stuff is similar. I don't know if these paths really diverge all that much kind of off the bat here. And we kind of have to see how things play out over the next few years. Madame Irma asks, any idea why Kwesi had to use a fifth and a future fourth to get us to 118 and draft his draft crush? That's right, he watched a Caleb Evans tape deep into the night romantically. When we had 122, that eventually became 2 fifth-rounders after 2 trade backs. Not questioning the need to move up to 118, just the ammunitions used to do it. So that probably had to do with the Raiders and what they wanted. They probably wanted picks next year, and they probably were willing to take a smaller price if it meant picks next year. Keep in mind the currency exchange is that a fourth next year is kind of like a fifth this year. So they kind of traded 2 fifths for a fourth and then traded a fourth for 2 fifths again. So those two deals are sort of similar, and those trades as a whole I think the Vikings came out like slightly behind in them, but like a trivial amount. So that's why, and I think that preference is just kind of up to who you're negotiating with. Or it could be the Vikings that said, yeah, we actually don't really like the depth of next year's draft as much as this year's draft, so we'll take another crack on day 3 in exchange for one next year. Cho asks, who do you think is the primary fifth D-back or nickel when we get to the regular season? Sullivan, Dantzler, Booth, Scene, Bynum. It seems like we have 6 viable DBs for 5 spots. And if it's Scene, can we call him the knuckleback? You can call Scene whatever you want if you can make it stick. This is going to be a packages thing. My answer to this is kind of going to be it'll rotate, and they'll have multiple packages. They'll have their 4D back base package for rundowns and stuff. That'll probably be Harrison Smith and Scene as the safeties, and then Patrick Peterson, and the other corner will be a competition probably between Booth and Dantzler. In terms of what happens when that 5th D-back comes on, it kind of depends. If it's a speedier package, then it's probably like Chandon Sullivan, who's more of a straight nickel. If it's a bigger package, maybe it's 12 personnel with a lot of tight ends, maybe that's Bynum and you go 3 safety. Or if it's, something even bigger, or it's 3 tight ends, but you don't necessarily need as much speed as a third safety gives you, and you want a little bit more like blitzing power, maybe it's Brian Asamoah, and he's another linebacker. And that it's going to be very situational, and I think all of those packages will get some level of run. Whoever ends up getting the most snaps on a given week is probably more matchup dependent than anything. But it's going to be, like, my answers to these questions are going to be really lame. It is kind of everybody, and they'll all rotate around. And it also depends, I have to imagine that Scene and Bynum formally will compete for a starting safety role. I think Scene wins that easily, but it's got to play out, right? And Bynum might start in the first parts of camp before Scene kind of gets his feet under him. And, we've seen it with Wyatt Davis and stuff. Guys that seem really pro-ready might struggle to transition to the NFL, and it's totally okay. So, yeah, it'll be dependent on some camp battles, and it'll be dependent on literally, like, on that play, who's in the huddle on the offense. Trevor from Kingston asks, what are the chances the Vikings asked the Lions, who they were trading up with, who they were trading up for? If the Lions answered Jameson Williams, then the Vikings agreed to make the trade for 2 picks. Rationale is the Vikings blocked the Packers from trading up to get one of the best wideouts in the draft. I don't know if the Packers were trying to trade up. I haven't seen it. Maybe they were. I don't know. If you've seen a rumor, I haven't. But it did sound like in the post-draft presser that Kwesi knew that they wanted Jameson Williams, or I think there was like a tier. So they wanted somebody that they kind of thought would be a good player. And I think they just made that deal because they thought they were getting the better end of it. Because they thought, going and getting, what did it turn into? Ed Ingram and Asamoah and Scene, and like the ammo to go get Booth. Like that package was just better than what they would get at like 12 and 46. And I reiterate, and I said this on Monday, YouTube comments hated this. I would have disagreed if the Vikings selected Jameson Williams at 12. I would have said that was a bad move and I wouldn't have liked it and that they reached. So, I don't know. Don't get in your enemy's way when he's making a mistake. I think that goes double for the Packers trade, never interrupt your enemy when he's making an error or whatever the Napoleon quote is. I think that's more the rationale. I don't think we need to galaxy brain this to say that they really were like, hate blocking the Packers or whatever, when then they like went and let the Packers come up for Christian Watson the next time. I think they just think that they got the better end of that deal. And if they're right, then they got in the way of a division rival and they damaged a division rival. That's like a huge deal, right? I have a whole bunch more questions that I want to get to. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. Vikings are 8.5 over under on for the 2022 season. So if you think that they can have a winning season, go bet it at betonline.net. It's your one-stop shop for all things Gramble. You can bet on all the other teams too. You can also bet on basketball playoffs, hockey playoffs going on. WNBA just kicked off. You can bet on fights. You can bet on you can even go on like play your favorite Vegas casino games. Go play some blackjack on betonline.net. Whatever it is, you can do weird parlays with their player props builder. You can bet in the middle of games live, like halftime, will they make a comeback, that kind of thing. Whatever it is, head on over to betonline.net. Get yourself a Gramblin' at BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey, thanks again for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. I'm moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Going to take one from Mitchell Dykstra now, who says, What can we expect or hope for out of Cam Dantzler this season? I kind of already said it. He competes with Booth for a job. And I think you're probably competing for rotational snaps. I don't think one just gets full-on benched until the other gets injured or whatever. I think that, you're going to keep them fresh, right? Because if you have two guys that can be like CB2 and you can give them each half a series to, rest and catch their breath and all that stuff, and then they'll be fresher in the fourth quarter. Like that kind of rules if you like both of them. But I think that depends on what happens in camp. And I think his camp is going to be really, really important to see how many reps he gets. Is he coming in for a drive or two to spell Booth, or does he beat Booth? And Booth is the one coming in for a drive or two. And then, of course, it depends on the health of Andrew Booth, which is a whole thing, and the health of Cameron Dantzler, which is a whole thing. So kind of having those two to complement each other. Hopefully, if one crashes and burns, the other one will work out. It gives you a chance. But it's a competition. That's what camp competitions are. Kenny Roche, let me go actually into a little more detail too with Dantzler. He is, I think, at his best when he is playing press man. And with Zimmer, I think Zimmer got in his head. I think this is a big developmental failure for Mr. DB. And he was playing off so much. He was playing really scared last year. So I hope he can drum up a little more courage, get in guys' face and jam like he knows how to. This is how he locked down Jamar Chase in LSU, back in college. Let me see that from him too, and competing with Andrew Booth, hopefully, that's his energy is said to be infectious, and that's exactly the energy I want. I want to transport Andrew Booth's attitude right into Cam Dantzler, and that kind of thing could happen if you spend a lot of time around him. Next one comes from Kenny Roche, who asks, outside of Lewis Seen, what player from the 2022 draft do you think will have the most impact going into the 2022 season? Andrew Booth is the easy answer, and I think the hard answer is Ed Ingram, who I think runs away with that right guard spot. We haven't talked about him on the field as much because of his off field, but I'm going to do a whole show on that. Don't worry, I'll get to it on both facets of the whole thing. But Ingram, if he starts at right guard and if he's as good as he's billed as a pass protector, that's huge, right? That's taking away the Oli Udoh problem from last year. That could be a lot more impactful than Booth, who could very well get injured and miss his rookie season or something, right? Because he's got a weird frame and an injury history and all that stuff. I think it's kind of lame to talk about it's the next guy and the guy after that, but yeah, that's how it goes, right? Mitch asks, why is Brian Asamoah going to be so dang good? I was skeptical at first, but learning more about him now. Dude's a true sideline-to-sideline linebacker. His physical traits are exactly what you look for in a modern-day linebacker. Well, that's what Kwesi said, right? That, he's modern linebackers, you're not looking for big thumpers. You're looking for guys who can cover. And his coverage instincts are kind of what he's supposed to be. He a little bit reminds me of what Chad Surratt was built to be able to become, and he already is that. And it's a much more sensible package because he can still blitz, he can still rush the passer, he's okay at getting off. He can evade a block. He doesn't get off blocks, but he can evade a block. So there's something, he's got an answer for that. So I do think he can be a contributor right away, and then maybe eventually, he takes over if you want to get rid of Eric Kendricks because he's too expensive, and you want to kind of transition into Asamoah. He can be the heir apparent there, save some money, and maybe Kendricks is going to hit 30 here, so maybe he starts dropping off in the next few years, or Jordan Hicks only on a 2-year contract, so he can kind of be, the plan should be for Asamoah to be the kind of understudy for those linebacker spots in a way that Troy Dye was supposed to be, that Chad Surratt was supposed to be, but those guys didn't work out, and the hope is that Asamoah is a little different. Spurgeon Wins Burner asks, Caleb Evans looked super unimpressive to me when I pulled up his highlight film. Is he any good? So I don't know what highlight film you're talking about. Highlight film might be the problem, though, because a lot of times the cornerback highlight is that time he went a whole quarter without giving up anything, right? And that's not really a sexy highlight that you would cut up to a good trap song, right? That's a little bit more unassuming. What I like about a Caleb Evans, and this is another one I got to go way deeper in. I haven't watched nearly enough tape on him to do a whole episode. But my impression right now, I love how fluid he is. I love how he's a lot more agile than his body type should be. And it's just because he's got really good technique and really good feet, and he's really smooth. I like the way that he jams. I like him as, I like the experience that he has. I like him as a fit. He's experienced in zone match concepts, and I think he's going to have to do a lot of that. And he's just got horrific grabbing problem. That's what drops him to the 4th round. That's my impression right now, but I'll get a lot more detailed on that later. Alexander the Dane asks, in a world where only 2 of these 3 can make the 53-man roster, who do you pick? Patrick Jones, Janarius Robinson, Kenny Willekes. I have an answer to this, and I'm going to tease you on it because a 53-man roster joint thing with me and Nick Olson came out at Zone Coverage today. at this morning, probably is out by the time you read this. And I answered that question. And yes, I did pick 2 of those 3 and I cut 1. So I'm going to tease. I'm not going to tell you. Go read my article. Suck it. Omar asks, predict 1 surprise cut for the offseason. Also in that article, but I will tease you this one. It's Alexander Madison. I think Ty Chandler could actually take stuff over for him. This is definitely a scorching hot take. I know. But Ty Chandler's strength is supposed to be his vision. And I reserve the right to take this back once I've watched more tape, by the way, because I have not watched nearly enough tape to lock this in. But where I'm at right now, everybody talks about how he sees the field and he makes good decisions and he has good vision and all that stuff. And Alexander Madison's vision, it has been one of his biggest problems here. And it's been one of the things kind of preventing him from being able to maybe be the guy that takes over for Dalvin Cook. And now instead we got to extend Dalvin Cook because Madison can't just take over and be the guy. That is the contrast is very noticeable, and it's the kind of thing that shows up in preseason. Neither of those guys are as athletic as Kene Nwangwu, and Nwangu's got the kick return job, so he's got one of these jobs locked up, and it really is between Ty Chandler. Can he make himself a 4th running back, or can he knock off Alexander Madison? I think new staff, no Kennedy Palomalu, who's really attached to Madison. You know, none of these guys. I think something surprising maybe could happen. I got a few more questions I want to get to. I want to see if I can't get to everybody's stuff here. But first, let me talk to you about your car. All right, take care of that dang thing. You feel a funny feeling. You hear a funny noise. You get a light on the dash. Take that thing in. Get it taken care of. It's going to save you money in the long run. And if you still need to save a little more money to get that repair done, I totally get it. That's why I go to rockauto.com to get the parts that my car needs. Just have your mechanic tell you what the part is, and then you can have that thing shipped directly to your door if you can afford to wait on it. And you can just take that right to the mechanic and be like, can you just install the part and I'll just pay you for the labor? You will save money doing this. Why pay 30, 50, even 100% more for car parts? That's what mechanics will do to you because they know you don't know the difference. But Rock Auto isn't going to do you like that. So head on over to rockauto.com, enter your make, your year, and your model. You get something you know is compatible with your car. And it's the same parts the mechanics order. It's right from the manufacturers. Rock Auto is leveraging the same connections. They're just cutting out the middleman so that you can save a buck. So head on over to rockauto.com, and whatever you buy there, make sure you let them know that Locked On sent you. Because if you do not, Zoe will never find out that she's not actually pregnant, which is a thing that's actually happening to her right now. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, coming down to the last few here, so let's get through them. The next one comes from Jordan Barrett, who says, how many of our draft picks do you see making the 53-man roster? I have 7, with Tomowo, Lowe, and Muse landing on the practice squad. But I see a path for most of these draft picks, considering our lack of depth. For sure, there's thin parts of the depth, and it seems like day 3 of the draft was sort of targeted at that, right? Like, we don't have a Rashad Hill replacement. Let's draft Vidarian Lowe, that kind of thing. That said, I am with you on those 3. I have those 3 not making the team. I have Ty Chandler making the team. And I have a Caleb Evans making the team, of course, as a 4th rounder. And I have Jalen Naylor making the team. Those are my day 3 guys. And so I guess, yeah, I'm with you on 7. So I think I'm in lockstep with you there. But again, you can see the whole thing and all my rationales for that in the article. MN Sports says, odds makers have the Vikings as a 500 team. What will it take for them to be significantly better than that? What has to happen, or is it even possible? So look, anything's possible. People had the Bengals as like a 5-win team last year that went to the Super Bowl. And that's like not even that weird. Here's what needs to happen. Kevin O'Connell needs to be right. Because Kevin O'Connell's pitch to the Vikings, to Vikings fans, is that I can fix Kirk Cousins. That's what he's saying. Kirk Cousins has not been taken full advantage of, and I can nurture him, and I can be exactly the QB whisperer that he needs to unlock a greater version of himself. And Kevin O'Connell's pitch is I can do it. I can get him to be that. So if he's right, then yeah, I think they can beat 500. Because that, was one of my biggest problems with Kirk Cousins. If he can undo the issues with Kirk Cousins, then their ceiling raises, right? Alan McCauley asks, what's your take on McCardell and his table pounding about not wanting another receiver? Wouldn't a coach want as much talent as possible to coach, or do you think it's because he didn't believe in the top wideouts? So that what you're probably talking about is a singular instance. They were doing a draft simulation, and it was like, with the board the way it was that time, Keenan McCardell kind of saying, of course I would like a receiver, but we have to think holistically, and Kwesi was really impressed by that sort of big picture viewpoint, that collaboration that comes with that, right? We're all collaborators and kumbayaing on the Vikings now. It's not Keenan McCardell saying, I don't want one of these receivers. I'm good with the guys we have. No, it's him understanding that the team is a whole and it's not just his position group, which I think is admirable. That said, maybe he didn't like the wide receivers also. Like, that also could totally be a part of it. I mean, I didn't like them very much, so I would agree. I don't think that's a particularly far-fetched opinion to have personally. Skull Actuary asks, how many legit starters or players over the next couple years do we need from this class to call the draft as either bad, fine, good, or great? If our top 3 picks start day 1 and contribute, is that a haul or table stakes? I think if you get 3 day 1 starters out of a draft, you're doing great. My rule of thumb is that by the end of their rookie contracts, you hopefully have 2 genuine starters that you're happy with, right? Guys that you're ready to give a second contract to. One, we'll call it a rotational guy, or, a backup or something like that. Somebody that is going to contribute, but he's not an every down player. And 2 backups, 2 guys that are going to make the roster as many years as you want them to make it. They're not necessarily good enough to be starters, but they're part of your depth, or maybe they play special teams or whatever. I think if you do that, you're doing great. And so that's kind of my rule of thumb. Obviously, every draft class is different. When you draft 15 players, the stakes kind of change. But that's where I guess my brain is at. So if you get 3 day 1 starters and they all are contributors and we're happy with all of them, anything good happens in day 3 and you already are kind of playing with house money. Cozy asks, the conventional thinking in NFL circles is that a GM's first draft should set the tone, and going for high floor prospects early is beneficial for executives without experience because of the lack of social capital. Through those lenses, do you think Kwesi's first draft is a plus? I think he did go for higher floor guys, especially in day 3. I don't know if he went for higher floor guys in the early parts of the draft. Andrew Booth could totally flame out because he's never healthy. There's definitely worlds, we talked about it yesterday, where Lewis Seen is like a catastrophe. Like, there's worlds where all these guys totally bust out and his first draft is a mess. I don't think he was like focusing on trying to do that or anything like that either. But I do think the day 3 picks, a guy like Vidarian Lowe seems like he's about just a Blake Brandel tier guy, and your team can use that guy. The Vikings used him last year, and now they've got 2 of those guys competing with each other. Seems like a fine situation to throw a 6th round pick at, but you're not really expecting to get any more of that. And compare that to a Moritz Boringer type pick from Rick, who could be Calvin Johnson if he learns how to play receiver, but he also could just never make a team ever. It is definitely a different vibe. So I think maybe he followed that a little bit on day 3, but not with the picks that like the thing kind of hangs on. So I don't know if he really did that, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good idea, but I guess if that's what NFL circles think. Purple Kool-Aid asks, who would win, a team full of kickers or a team full of punters? I'm going punters. Punters, they're tasked, I think, with tackling more often, and especially at the high school and college level. And that means that they, I think, will tend to be a little bulkier. So I think the team of punters could probably run on the team of kickers for like 8 yards a pop pretty consistently and probably blow them out, because the kickers are usually a little wirier. Maybe I'm overreacting, though, because all I'm thinking about is Ryan Wright, who's 6'5" and like 245 pounds. King Squeaks asks, will the Lions or Bears be better in 2022, and by how many wins? Don't have to schedule predict, but what's going to be the gap? So the betting market has the Bears over under 7 and the Lions over under 6. So the betting market says Bears. I think it's closer than that, but I still probably go Bears, as much as I've ragged on them, and their roster is barren, and they're totally going to ruin Justin Fields. But a ruined Justin Fields, I think I still take it over Jared Goff with not that much more help. But they do have an O-line, and that's more than the Bears can say. So, and the Bears don't have a D-line anymore. So I could totally see that series being like split and maybe even like a Lions sweep or something like that. But I think on the whole, I probably give the Bears a better chance. But I mean, we're talking 6 wins or 6.5 wins. Like, this could totally go the other way. Final question we're going to do today comes from Strawwiat, who says, do you put cream cheese or ricotta in your lasagna? I've never heard of cream cheese in a lasagna. That doesn't sound very good. It's ricotta. And if I'm going to really do it, I will make ricotta, because grocery store ricotta sucks. This is a tip I got from Brian Lagerstrom, who's one of my favorite food YouTubers. Making ricotta is always going to be better than grocery store ricotta. Grocery store ricotta is gritty and it's loaded with like preservatives and stuff, and it makes the texture kind of weird, and it's a big reason why a lot of people don't like ricotta. But if you take a half gallon of whole milk, heat it up to, I think, 190 degrees, and be really precise about that, like use a thermometer, and then very carefully pour in a quarter cup of vinegar, and then just let it separate and scoop off the curds off the top. Those curds are ricotta. And then eventually you get enough of those curds off, you can strain the rest through a cheesecloth, and you've made yourself like a good like pound of ricotta. And it's the like most luscious, creamy, sweet ricotta that you'll ever have in your life. And it takes about 20 minutes to do. It rules. It's awesome. I will talk to you all tomorrow. Hopefully we can do a little Andrew Booth stuff if I'm a good boy and I get around to it. Otherwise, there's a couple articles coming out tomorrow that I'm excited to talk to you about. One of them is the 53-man thing. So we got a lot of stuff to do this week. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.